You may not want to admit this, but I need you to think about it for a moment. How many times in the past few months have you heard the word cancer? Not on television, not in a documentary. I'm talking about real life. Someone you know, someone you recognize, someone who was perfectly fine until they weren't. A neighbor, a friend, a relative. One day they were walking, talking, making plans for the future. And then suddenly, everything changed, a diagnosis. And from that moment on, their life was divided into two parts, before cancer and after. I'm Dr. Baker, and after years of working with patients, I can tell you something that most people are afraid to say out loud. This is not rare anymore. It's not something that happens to other people. It's happening everywhere, closer than you think. And what makes it even more unsettling is that in many cases, there were no clear warning signs, no pain, no obvious symptoms, nothing that made them stop and think, something is wrong, until it was already there. That's the part that keeps people up at night. Because deep down, there's a question you don't want to ask, but it's there anyway. What if it happens to me? What if it's already starting, and I just don't know it yet? Most people try to comfort themselves with a simple explanation. They say, it's genetic, it runs in the family, it's just bad luck. And for a long time, even in medicine, we leaned heavily on that idea. Genes, DNA, something written deep inside your body, long before you had any control over it. But here's what I need you to understand. That explanation is incomplete. Because if cancer were purely genetic, then everyone with the same genes would develop it. But they don't. Two people can share similar genetics, live in the same environment, even grow up in the same household, and one develops cancer while the other never does. So the real question is not just, where does cancer come from? The real question is, what allows it to grow? Because here is something most people are never told. Right now, as you're listening to me, your body is not perfectly clean. There are abnormal cells forming. In your body, in mine, in everyone. This is not a mistake. This is biology. Your body is constantly creating new cells, replacing old ones, repairing damage. And every time that process happens, there is a chance for error, a tiny mistake in the copying process. Most of those mistakes are harmless. Some are corrected immediately, and some are eliminated by your immune system before they ever become a problem. But a few, a very small number, manage to survive, and that's where the story begins. Not when cancer is diagnosed, but long before that. What most people don't realize is that those cells on their own are not the real danger. Not yet. A single abnormal cell is not what destroys a life. It's what happens next. Because for that cell to become something serious, something life-threatening, it needs one thing above all else. It needs to be fed. It needs oxygen. It needs nutrients. It needs a supply line, and without that, it stays small. So small that it can sit inside your body for years, even decades, without ever causing a symptom. No pain, no signal, no warning. It exists, but it cannot grow. Think of it like a seed buried deep in dry soil. It has the potential to become something much larger, but without water, without sunlight, without nourishment, it remains dormant, harmless. But the moment you water that seed, everything changes, growth begins. And that is exactly how cancer behaves inside the human body. There is a process, a biological switch, that determines whether a tiny cluster of abnormal cells remains silent or becomes something aggressive. That process is called angiogenesis. It's a word most people have never heard before, but it may be one of the most important concepts you will ever understand about cancer. Angiogenesis simply means the formation of new blood vessels. Your body uses it all the time. When you heal a wound, your body creates new blood vessels. When muscles grow, new blood vessels form. When tissues repair, blood flow increases. It's a normal, necessary process, but like many things in the body, it has to be tightly controlled, because when that control is lost, it can be hijacked. Cancer cells are not passive. They don't just sit there and wait. They send signals. They release chemical messengers that essentially call for help. They tell your body, build me a blood supply. And if your body responds to that signal, if new blood vessels begin to grow toward that cluster of cells, everything changes. Because now, that tiny, silent cluster is no longer starving. It is being fed. And once that happens, growth is no longer slow. It becomes explosive. What was once microscopic can expand rapidly. What once had no impact can begin to invade. What once was harmless can become life-threatening. And here's the part that should make you pause. This process, this switch, does not happen randomly. It is influenced by the internal environment of your body, the signals, the chemistry, the balance between what promotes growth and what stops it. And that internal environment is not fixed. It is shaped every single day by your choices, especially by what you eat. Because the food you consume is not just fuel, it is information. It sends signals to your cells. It can either support the systems that keep abnormal cells under control, or it can create conditions that allow those cells to grow. And this is where everything begins to shift. Because most people spend their entire lives asking, how do I avoid getting cancer? But almost no one asks the more important question, what am I feeding inside my body right now? Because cancer does not become dangerous the moment it appears. It becomes dangerous the moment it is nourished, the moment the environment inside your body allows it to grow. And once you understand that, you begin to see something differently. You begin to realize this is not only about what you cannot control, it is also about what you do every single day without even thinking about it. For most of your life, you've probably been told a very simple story, that cancer is something written into your genes, something you inherit, something you cannot change, something that, if it is going to happen, will happen no matter what you do. And on the surface, that explanation feels comforting, because if it's genetic, then it's not your fault. There's nothing you could have done, nothing you could have changed. But here's the problem with that belief. It doesn't match what we see in real life. Because if cancer were purely genetic, then families would all share the same fate. Every sibling would develop the same disease. Every parent would pass it down predictably. Every person with the same genetic risk would follow the same path. But they don't. You've seen this yourself. Two people, same family, same background. One develops cancer, else is happening. Something beyond genes. And this is where we need to be very clear. Genes may load the gun, but they do not pull the trigger. There are factors that influence whether those abnormal cells remain controlled or whether they begin to grow. Factors that determine whether your body suppresses disease or allows it to progress. And many of those factors are not fixed. They are dynamic. They change day by day, meal by meal, choice by choice. Your body is not a static system. It is constantly responding to its environment, constantly adjusting, constantly deciding which processes to activate and which ones to shut down. And one of the most powerful influences on that environment is something so ordinary, so routine, that most people never question it. Food, not as calories, not as comfort, not as habit, but as biological signals. Signals that can either support your body's natural defenses or weaken them. Signals that can influence inflammation, immune activity, and even the very processes that allow abnormal cells to grow. So the question is no longer, is cancer in my genes? The real question becomes, what kind of environment am I creating inside my body every single day? Because that environment may matter more than you've ever been told. To understand what really determines whether cancer grows, you need to see what's happening beneath the surface. Inside your body, there is a constant battle taking place, not once a year, not once a month. Every single day, your immune system is not passive. It is actively scanning, identifying, and eliminating abnormal cells before they ever become a threat. You have specialized cells, natural killer cells, T cells, whose only job is to find anything that doesn't belong and destroy it. and most of the time they do this remarkably well. That's why you can live for decades with abnormal cells forming and disappearing without ever knowing they were there. But the system is not perfect. Sometimes a few cells slip through, not enough to harm you, but enough to exist. And at that point, something critical happens. Those cells reach a kind of crossroads. They either remain small, controlled, and silent, or they begin to grow. And what determines that outcome is not just the cell itself, it's the environment around it. Because no matter how aggressive a cell might be, it cannot grow without support, it cannot expand without resources, it cannot become dangerous unless it is supplied. This is where angiogenesis comes in. Imagine a tiny cluster of abnormal cells sitting in your body, so small that it's almost insignificant. At that size, it has no access to blood, no oxygen supply, no steady flow of nutrients. It is, in a very real sense, starving. And because of that, it cannot grow beyond a certain point. It's trapped, limited, harmless. But cancer cells are not passive. They adapt. They release signals, chemical messengers, that tell your body to do something very specific, to grow new blood vessels, to bring a supply line directly to them. And if your body responds to that signal, if new vessels begin to form and connect to that cluster, everything changes. Because now what was once starving is being fed. Oxygen begins to flow in, nutrients are delivered continuously, waste is carried away. And suddenly growth is no longer restricted, it accelerates. This is the moment when a microscopic problem can become something much larger, something that spreads, something that begins to interfere with the normal function of your body. And here is what most people never realize. This entire process, this switch from harmless to dangerous, is influenced by the internal conditions of your body. There are signals that promote blood vessel growth, and there are signals that suppress it. There are factors that strengthen your immune system and factors that weaken it. There are conditions that create inflammation and conditions that reduce it. Your body is constantly balancing these forces, and that balance determines what happens next. Not just whether abnormal cells exist, but whether they are allowed to grow. So when people say cancer is random or that it appears out of nowhere, that's not entirely true. Because long before a tumor is detected, the conditions that allowed it to grow have already been building, quietly, gradually, over time. And one of the most powerful influences on those conditions is something you do every single day, something that shapes your internal environment more consistently than almost anything else: what you eat. While all of this is happening, something else is quietly taking place inside your body, something even more fundamental. Your DNA is under constant attack, not once in a while. Every single day, every time you step outside into sunlight, every time you breathe polluted air, every time your body processes food and produces energy, there are tiny invisible reactions happening at the cellular level. Reactions that generate what we call oxidative stress. Unstable molecules, free radicals, moving through your cells, colliding with structures that are essential to life, including your DNA. And when DNA is damaged, even in small ways, it changes the instructions your cells follow, instructions that control how a cell grows, when it divides, and when it stops. Most of the time your body catches these errors. You have built-in repair systems, complex, highly coordinated mechanisms that identify damage and fix it before it becomes permanent. Think of it like a maintenance crew working around the clock, patching cracks before they spread, correcting mistakes before they turn into something serious. But here's the problem. Those repair systems are not unlimited. They require support. They depend on the availability of specific nutrients, antioxidants, and compounds that allow them to function properly. Without that support, the system slows down. Mistakes begin to accumulate. Small errors that were once corrected start to remain. And over time, those errors can build into something much larger. Because when damaged DNA is not repaired, it increases the likelihood that abnormal cells will behave differently, more aggressively, less controlled, more capable of surviving when they shouldn't. And now, combine that with what you learned earlier: a cell that has accumulated damage in an environment that allows it to grow with access to blood supply. That is when risk begins to rise. Not because something appeared suddenly, but because something was allowed to progress quietly over years. This is why the question is not just, how do I avoid damage? Because some level of damage is unavoidable. The real question is, am I giving my body what it needs to repair that damage before it becomes a problem? And this is where your daily choices begin to matter more than you think. Because certain foods don't just provide energy, they provide the raw materials your body uses to defend, to repair, and to protect itself. Now, this is where everything becomes very real. Because up until this point, you might be thinking, this all makes sense, but what am I actually supposed to do with this information? Let me answer that directly. You don't need to completely change your life overnight. You don't need extreme diets. You don't need expensive treatments. You don't need anything complicated. What you need is to understand how small, consistent choices can influence the environment inside your body. And I want to start with something simple, something most people overlook. A small fruit that doesn't look like much, but carries a surprising amount of biological impact. Kiwi. Now, I know what you might be thinking, it's just fruit, but what matters is not how it looks, it's what it does inside your body. There was a study that looked at what happens when people eat kiwi regularly, not in massive amounts, not as part of an extreme diet, just 1 to a few kiwis a day. And what they found was something that caught a lot of researchers off guard. The level of DNA damage in cells was significantly reduced. Think about that for a moment. Not just preventing damage, but supporting the body's ability to deal with it. Because kiwi is not just rich in vitamin C, it contains a combination of antioxidants, polyphenols, and other compounds that work together. And that word matters. Together. Because your body does not operate on isolated nutrients. It operates on systems, networks of reactions. And when you consume whole foods that contain multiple protective compounds, those systems function more effectively. Vitamin C, for example, helps neutralize free radicals before they can damage DNA. At the same time, it supports enzymatic processes involved in DNA repair. Polyphenols contribute additional protection, reducing oxidative stress, and stabilizing cellular structures. And when these compounds are present together, their effects are not just additive, they are synergistic, stronger than any one component alone. Now, I wanted to be very clear about something. Kiwi is not a cure. No single food is. But that's not the point. The point is this: every day your DNA is being damaged. That part is unavoidable. What is not unavoidable is how well your body responds to that damage, whether it repairs it or whether it allows it to accumulate. And something as simple as adding 1 or 2 kiwis into your daily routine. That process. Not dramatically, not instantly, but consistently. And consistency is where real change happens, because your body doesn't respond to what you do once. It responds to what you do over and over again. Day after day, meal after meal. And when you begin to understand that, you start to see food differently, not as something that simply fills you up, but as something that shapes what is happening inside you right now. Now let me take you one step further, because protecting your DNA is only part of the equation. The other part is controlling what happens after abnormal cells already exist. And this is where something even more interesting begins to emerge. Because if cancer depends on being fed, then anything that interferes with that supply changes the outcome. And one of the most studied natural compounds related to this process comes from something millions of people drink every day. Green tea, not as a trend, not as a detox fad, but as something that has been consumed for centuries. Long before modern medicine began studying it, green tea contains a group of compounds called catechins, and one in particular stands out, EGCG. Now this is where things become important. In laboratory settings, EGCG has been shown to interact with the very signals that cancer cells use to grow new blood vessels. Remember what we talked about earlier, angiogenesis, the process that allows a tiny cluster of cells to develop its own blood supply. Without that process, growth is limited. With it, growth accelerates. What EGCG appears to do is interfere with that signaling, not in a dramatic, instant way, but in a subtle regulatory way. It affects how those grow blood vessels messages are received. It reduces the intensity of those signals. And when those signals are reduced, the formation of new blood vessels can slow down. Now, I want you to understand something clearly. This is not the same as a pharmaceutical drug. It does not shut the process off completely. It does not act with that level of force. But that's not how your body works best anyway. Your body is not built for extremes. It's built for balance. And what compounds like EGCG do is help shift that balance away from excessive growth and toward control. At the same time, green tea also provides antioxidant support, reducing oxidative stress, supporting cellular stability, and contributing to the same protective environment we've been building throughout this conversation. Now think about this for a moment. This is not a treatment you take once. This is not something you do when there's already a problem. This is something that can be part of your routine, something simple. A cup in the afternoon, another in the evening. Not because it's trendy, but because it consistently sends the same signal to your body. A signal that says, maintain balance, limit unnecessary growth, support control. And over time, those signals matter because just like we said before, your body responds to what you do repeatedly, not occasionally, not perfectly, but consistently. And something as ordinary as what you drink each day can either contribute to an environment that supports abnormal growth or one that helps keep it in check. Now let's talk about something most people completely underestimate. Your body already knows how to fight cancer. That may sound surprising, but it's true. You are not defenseless. Right now, inside your body, there are specialized immune cells whose only job is to identify abnormal cells and destroy them. They don't wait for symptoms. They don't wait for a diagnosis. They act early, quietly, relentlessly. Natural killer cells. T cells, these are your internal defense forces, and when they are functioning well, they can eliminate potential threats long before they ever become something serious. But here's the problem. As you age, as stress increases, as inflammation builds, that system becomes less efficient, not completely broken, but slower, less responsive, less precise. And when that happens, cells that would have been destroyed may begin to survive. Not because your body doesn't know what to do, but because it no longer has the same level of support. And this is where something as simple as a small handful of fruit can begin to matter. Blueberries. Again, nothing dramatic at first glance, but inside them are compounds called anthocyanins. These are the pigments that give blueberries their deep color. And they are not just there for appearance. They are biologically active. They interact with your immune system in ways that researchers have been studying for years. What they've found is that regular consumption of foods rich in anthocyanins can increase the activity of immune cells, not by forcing them, but by supporting their function, helping them respond more effectively, helping them do what they are already designed to do, which is to recognize and eliminate abnormal cells. At the same time, blueberries help reduce chronic inflammation, and this matters more than most people realize. Because inflammation is not always obvious. It's not always pain. It's often silent, low level, persistent. And over time, it creates an environment that makes it easier for abnormal cells to survive and grow. So now, think about what blueberries are doing. On one side, they are helping activate immune defenses. On the other, they are reducing the conditions that allow disease to progress. Two effects, working together. And again, this is not about a single moment, it's about repetition. A cup of blueberries today, another tomorrow. Not because it feels like medicine, but because it becomes part of your routine. And over time, that routine begins to shape your internal environment. It strengthens what is already there. It supports what your body is already trying to do. Because the goal is not to fight cancer directly. The goal is to make your body better at doing what it was designed to do from the beginning. To detect, to respond, to eliminate. And sometimes, the difference between a system that works and one that struggles comes down to the smallest daily inputs. Now, this next one is where many people start to feel confused, because for years, you may have heard completely opposite messages about it. Some say it's healthy. Others say it's dangerous. Some claim it protects you. Others warn that it could increase cancer risk. I'm talking about soy, and this confusion is not your fault. It comes from how information has been simplified and sometimes misunderstood, because soy contains compounds called phytoestrogens, and that word, estrogen, immediately raises concern. People hear it and think, if it acts like estrogen, doesn't that increase the risk of hormone-related cancers? It sounds logical. But the reality is more nuanced than that. Phytoestrogens are not the same as human estrogen. They do not behave in the same way inside your body. In fact, in many cases, they do the opposite. They can bind to estrogen receptors and block stronger, more aggressive forms of estrogen from attaching. Think of it like this. If a receptor is a lock, phytoestrogens are like a soft key that fits into that lock, but doesn't fully activate it. And by occupying that space, they prevent stronger signals from getting through. This is one of the reasons why populations that consume soy regularly have been observed to have lower rates of certain hormone-related cancers. But that's only part of the story, because soy also contains a compound called genistein, and genistein has been studied for its potential effects on angiogenesis, the same process we talked about earlier, the formation of blood vessels that feed abnormal cells. What researchers have observed is that genistein can influence the signaling pathways involved in that process, helping reduce excessive blood vessel growth, not shutting it down completely, but, again, shifting the balance away from uncontrolled expansion and toward regulation. And now, when you step back and look at it, you begin to see a pattern. This is not about one food doing one thing. This is about multiple foods, affecting multiple systems that all connect to the same outcome: control, balance, stability. Now, I want to address something important. The benefits we're talking about are associated with whole soy foods, things like tofu, tempeh, edamame, not ultra-processed products, and not isolated supplements taken in extreme amounts. Because once again, context matters. Your body responds best to natural combinations, not isolated, concentrated extracts. So when soy is consumed as part of a balanced diet, in moderate, consistent amounts, it becomes another piece of the puzzle, another way of supporting the internal environment that determines whether abnormal cells remain controlled or begin to grow. And this is why understanding the difference between fear and evidence is so important. Because sometimes what people avoid out of fear is actually something that could support their health when used appropriately. Now, this next one might be one of the most overlooked yet most powerful foods we're going to talk about. Because most people think they already know it, they've seen it on their plate, they've eaten it before: broccoli. But what they don't realize is that the most potent form of it is not what you find on a typical dinner table. It's something much smaller, much younger. Broccoli sprouts. These are the tiny, early-stage shoots of the broccoli plant, just a few days old, delicate, almost insignificant in appearance. But inside them, barkable is happening. They contain extremely high levels of a compound called sulforaphane. And when I say high, I don't mean slightly more, I mean dramatically more. In some cases, broccoli sprouts can contain dozens of times more sulforaphane than mature broccoli. Now, why does that matter? Because sulforaphane plays a very specific role inside your body. It activates what we call detoxification pathways. Your body has systems, especially in the liver, designed to identify harmful compounds, neutralize them, and eliminate them before they cause damage. But those systems don't run at full capacity all the time. They need to be activated, supported, and this is where sulforaphane becomes important. It helps switch on those protective mechanisms. It increases the activity of enzymes that break down potential toxins, compounds that, if left unchecked, could contribute to cellular damage, and over time, increase risk. So now, think about what this means. You are not just avoiding harmful substances, you are actively improving your body's ability to deal with them, to process them more efficiently, to clear them before they have a chance to accumulate. And that changes the equation, because again, damage is not always avoidable, but accumulation can be influenced. Now, sulforaphane has also been studied for its interaction with abnormal cells, not in a way that acts like a drug, but in a way that supports the body's natural regulatory processes, helping maintain balance, helping prevent uncontrolled behavior at the cellular level. And once again, we see the same pattern. Not force, not extremes, but support, activation, regulation. Now here's something most people don't know. How you prepare broccoli matters, because the way you cook it can affect how much sulforaphane your body actually receives. Boiling, for example, can reduce its availability. Light steaming, on the other hand, can preserve and even enhance it. And with sprouts, many people consume them raw, adding them to salads, or mixing them into meals. Simple. No complexity, no extreme effort, and yet, a meaningful contribution to the internal systems we've been talking about. Because when you begin to look at your body this way, you stop thinking only about what you're avoiding, and you start thinking about what you are activating, what you are strengthening, what you are supporting every single day. Now here's something that often surprises people, because for years you may have been told the same thing, that fresh food is always better, that raw vegetables are the healthiest option. And in many cases that's true, but not always. Because sometimes the way you prepare a food changes what your body is actually able to absorb from it. And tomatoes are one of the best examples of this. Tomatoes contain a compound called lycopene. It's what gives them their red color. But more importantly, it's a powerful antioxidant, one that has been studied for its role in protecting cells, particularly in relation to certain types of cancer. Now, here's where things get interesting. When you eat a raw tomato, you are getting lycopene, but not as much as you think. In its natural state, lycopene is locked inside the structure of the plant. Your body can only absorb a limited amount of it, but when you cook tomatoes, something changes. Heat breaks down those cell walls. It releases lycopene into a form that your body can access more easily, and that means more of it actually enters your system, more of it becomes available to do what it's supposed to do, to help protect your cells, to reduce oxidative stress, and to support the stability of your DNA. But there's another detail that makes this even more important. Lycopene is fat-soluble, which means it is absorbed more effectively when consumed with a small amount of healthy fat. So now, imagine this. A simple tomato sauce, cooked gently, with a bit of olive oil, what looks like an ordinary meal, is actually delivering a much higher level of this protective compound than a raw tomato on its own. And once again, we come back to the same idea. It's not just about what you eat, it's about how your body uses it. Because if a nutrient is present, but not absorbed, it doesn't have the same impact. Now, I want to be clear, this doesn't mean raw vegetables are bad. It means context matters. It means understanding how to get the most out of what you're already eating. Because small adjustments, simple changes, can significantly influence what your body receives. And over time, those differences add up because, again, this is not about one meal. It's not about one perfect day of eating. It's about patterns, habits, repetition. And when you begin to make choices that improve how your body absorbs and uses nutrients, you are not just eating. You are shaping your internal environment. You are supporting the systems that protect you at a level most people never think about. Now, this next piece of the puzzle is something that, until recently, most people had never even considered. Because for a long time, when we talked about health, we focused only on the organs we could see, the heart, the lungs, the liver. But there is an entire system inside your body that doesn't get nearly enough attention, and yet, it may play one of the most important roles in determining how well your body responds to disease: your gut. Inside your digestive system, there are trillions of bacteria, not harmful by default, not something to be eliminated, but something to be balanced, because some of these bacteria support your health, and others can work against it. And what researchers have discovered over the past decade has changed how we understand the immune system completely. Because your gut bacteria are not just helping you digest food, they are directly influencing how your immune system behaves, how it responds, how effectively it recognizes abnormal cells, how aggressively it acts when something is wrong. And here's where things become very interesting. There is a specific type of beneficial bacteria that has been linked to stronger immune responses, particularly in the context of cancer. Now, this is still an evolving area of research, but the pattern is becoming clear. When this type of bacteria is present in higher amounts, the body appears to respond more effectively, more precisely, more powerfully. And the question becomes, how do you support that? How do you create an environment in your gut that encourages those beneficial bacteria to thrive? And this is where something as simple as a fruit can play a role. Pomegranate. Pomegranates contain compounds called elagitannins. Now, on their own, these compounds are not the final product. They are transformed, converted by your gut bacteria into other bioactive compounds that your body can use. And this is the key, because what you eat doesn't just affect you directly, it feeds your microbiome, and your microbiome influences your immune system. So now, there is a chain reaction. Food, gut bacteria, immune response, cellular control. And when that chain is supported, your body is better equipped to maintain balance, better equipped to respond when abnormal cells appear, better equipped to regulate processes that, if left unchecked, could lead to disease. Now again, I want to keep this grounded. Pomegranate is not a cure, no food is. But what it represents is something larger, a shift in how we think about health. Because it's no longer just about individual nutrients or isolated systems. It's about connections, interactions, systems working together. And when you support those systems consistently, you are not just reacting to problems, you are influencing the conditions that determine whether those problems ever develop in the first place. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, this all makes sense, but how do I actually apply it in real life? Because information alone doesn't change anything. What matters is what you do with it. And the good news is, this doesn't have to be complicated. You don't need to follow a strict plan. You don't need to measure every gram. You don't need to get it perfect. What matters most is consistency. Because your body does not respond to extreme efforts once in a while. It responds to what you do every single day. So let me give you something practical, something simple enough that you can actually follow. Start with timing. Your body's repair systems are most active when you sleep. That's when cellular maintenance happens. That's when damaged DNA is repaired. So what you consume during the day matters for what happens at night. If you want to support that process, focus on eating your protective foods earlier in the day. For example, have your kiwi or your berries in the morning. Give your body time to absorb those nutrients, circulate them, and make them available before your repair systems go to work. Now, let's talk about combinations. Because certain foods become more effective when they are paired correctly. Green tea with lemon, that small addition of vitamin C, can significantly improve the stability and absorption of the compounds in tea. Tomatoes with olive oil, because lycopene needs fat to be absorbed properly. Without it, much of the benefit is lost. These are small details, but over time, they create real differences. You can also think in terms of simple routines. A smoothie in the morning with blueberries, kiwi, maybe a handful of greens. A cup of green tea in the afternoon, instead of something sugary, a meal that includes cooked tomatoes, paired with a healthy fat. A few additions, not a complete overhaul. Now, here's another important point. Avoid heavy meals late at night, because digestion is an energy-demanding process. And when your body is focused on digesting food, it is not fully focused on repair. Try to leave at least 2 to 3 hours between your last meal and sleep. Let your body shift into recovery mode. Now, I also want to address something I see very often. People trying to replace real food with supplements, capsules, extracts, concentrated formulas. And while some supplements have their place, they are not the same as whole foods, because whole foods contain complex combinations of compounds that work together in ways we still don't fully understand. You cannot isolate that into a single pill and expect the same effect. So focus first on real food. Simple, consistent, repeatable habits. Because this is not about doing everything perfectly, it's about doing enough consistently to support your body over time. And when you do that, you are not just reacting to disease, you are shaping the conditions that determine whether it develops at all. I want you to pause for a moment and think about someone, not a stranger, not a statistic, someone you actually knew, someone who used to sit at the table with you, laugh with you, talk about ordinary things, and then one day, you heard the word cancer. At first, it didn't feel real because they looked the same, they sounded the same, nothing seemed different until it was. The hospital visits, the treatments, the quiet changes, and then, the moment you realized, this was not something they were going to walk away from. Most people don't see it coming. There's no clear line, no moment where everything suddenly begins. It builds, silently, gradually, while life is still happening, while people are making plans, thinking they have more time. And maybe that's the hardest part, not the diagnosis, but the realization that it started long before anyone knew, that the body was sending signals long before anyone was listening. And I'm not saying this to scare you. I'm saying this because most people never get the chance to go back, to change what they did, to understand what was happening. But you do. Right now, you do. And maybe, just maybe, the difference between hearing that story again and never having to hear it about yourself comes down to what you choose to do, starting today. Let's bring this back to something simple. Cancer does not begin the day you hear the diagnosis. It begins long before that, in small, invisible changes, in cells you never feel, in processes you never notice, and for years, your body is trying to manage it, trying to repair damage, trying to control growth, trying to keep everything in balance. The question is not whether those systems exist. They do. The question is, are you helping them or working against them? Because every day you are sending signals through what you eat, through what you repeat, through what you make part of your routine. You are either creating an environment that supports control or one that slowly, quietly allows things to grow. This is not about fear. This is about awareness. Because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And once you understand it, you realize something most people never do. You are not completely powerless, not as much as you've been led to believe, not as much as you've told yourself, because health is not built in a single moment, and neither is disease. It is built in the quiet decisions you make every day. So the next time you sit down to eat, I want you to remember one thing. You are not just feeding your body, you are feeding the environment inside it. And that environment will decide what grows.